from Los Angeles, this is the Echelon Radio Network.
Good morning. This is Jerry Hemsworth with the Echelon Radio Podcast. And this is a Friday morning, listener, and I'm really thrilled because I have a guest in the studio I've known probably more than 15 years. And he's really always been such a wonderful person. I have Robert Grossman from Black Diamond Leadership. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Jerry. And actually, I think it's been more like 20 years.
Oh, don't say that.
Yeah. Well, we were kids.
Yeah, we were. We were little. I think we grew up together, didn't we?
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
That's good. That makes me feel better. So tell me about Black Diamond Leadership and what type of clients and who do you work with and why it brings you joy.
Thank you, Jerry. You know, we don't work with a particular industry necessarily, but I do have a specific type of client that I really enjoy working with. And that's a client that very much value their people and they want to develop their people. And if a client is into developing their people and helping them grow and become better communicators and leaders and build better teams, then that's my target client, that type of person. I do a lot of work now with biotech and hospitals, but that's not specifically an industry that I target.
So are you doing conflict resolution? Are you doing team building? All of the above?
It's all the above. I use a model I call the Leadership Power Quadrant, and it focuses on 4 core areas of development. Number 1 is emotional mastery or emotional intelligence.
Nice.
Without that, nothing else works. You have to start with that self-awareness and develop the skill of managing their own reactions, or we like to say respond to what I call key moments, triggering events.
Yes.
When we work on that, then we can start focusing on really powerful communications, building trust, and shared responsibilities. And our target is to move companies to a term that you might or might not be familiar with. It's a big term. It's called psychological safety.
Yeah.
And it's the industry term, not my favorite term, but what we're really looking at doing is removing the fear of speaking up and participating in the process of running an organization and a team. And we found that when we can remove that fear, remarkable things begin to happen.
Yes. Do you get a sense of what the number one fear is, or is it just run the gamut?
I think probably the number one fear is people are afraid to speak up and share an idea, or perhaps suggest something may not be structured properly, whatever it might be, that there's going to be some kind of retribution that they're going to look down upon.
Right.
So in other organizations, there's a fear of pointing out safety hazards, for example. Not the obvious ones, like wet floor, but other safety hazards, because they don't want to be put into that bucket. Like there's a fear that there'll be a negative consequence for their speaking up.
Right. I've known a couple of situations of what you're speaking. One regarding employment issues, being sort of the person who calls out a bad or wrong practice, and I've spoken with a few attorneys that say, the stigma or the label is a real thing, and when somebody leaves that organization, once they've brought a flaw to the attention of the management, if they go to another organization and they've got a recommendation in somebody else's work, I know that person, they cause trouble. They caused trouble at the last company, and then they don't get hired.
Right.
Very interesting stuff. I wonder, though, in your training of these people who are afraid to speak up, not just about that, but anything, put forward an idea, does it take a long time to get them past that fear, or is it relatively short? There's some techniques. What do you find?
Well, in fact, I was just thinking about this the other day. what does a 1% improvement in anything really mean? And is 1% big or little? Depends, right? And I remember I heard one time a metaphor. I always get metaphors and analogies mixed up, but a metaphor that if two planes take off from Los Angeles headed towards Washington, D.C., but one plane is 1 degree off, by the time they get to their destination, the difference is huge.
Yes.
So I don't go for radical change in companies because that doesn't tend to stick. There's a high about it. It works for a while, and then it begins to break down.
Gotcha.
So if we can improve open communication, for example, just by a smaller margin, and begin to build that process of trust. See, we train people how to interact with us, right? So if I'm somebody who gets upset all the time, you're going to interact with me on like you're walking on thin ice.
Right.
And so that's the same process in teams. We have to begin to develop that team in such a way where people begin to take a little bit of risk. We don't, not a huge risk because it may not work. So it is. I do see the change happening over time. I focus first, though, on emotional mastery.
Yeah.
And that's really, my opinion, that's the gold. And it's actually become my number one program is emotional mastery right now.
Nice. Well, I can imagine when the more stressed the world is, the more stressed the workplace becomes, that this would be a very good thing for you. I would imagine also you helping them in the workplace would help them in the personal place. So I think that's fantastic. What led you to Black Diamond Leadership? Let's back up even more. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in West Los Angeles, in Brentwood. Went to Palisades High, which has been in the news a lot recently because of the fires.
Sure.
And I had a wonderful childhood in the West Side.
Yeah. And then where'd you go to school?
School was a little bit tough for me. I tried a couple different things.
Gotcha.
I studied abroad my first year out of high school.
Nice.
And then I came back, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was very confused, actually.
Gotcha.
And so I spent a couple of years working in education, and then I got an opportunity to work for a computer company, a small computer company, to be their first salesperson, and they sold personal computers. We were like the first people to sell personal computers.
Yes.
And so that was in my mid-20s at this point. And that's when I went back to school again to Antioch and graduated. My bachelor's was in psychology and
go
minor
figure what you're doing now, Riley.
Exactly. Yeah. So we sold computers. Some people might know the company Kaufman and Broad Home Builders.
Of course.
I sold them their first PC.
My gosh.
So, and that was way back when, right? When we would make a lot of money off of that. And I loved it. I loved that whole industry. And I moved to, I become an IBM business partner. And then, but my passion back then was photography.
Oh, boy.
I loved photography and I loved doing slide presentations. And so I thought that that's what I wanted to get into. And it so happened when I was at IBM, there was a multimedia lab downstairs where they're doing state-of-the-art development of this stuff. And I became friends with them, and I would spend some time down there. But
learning and observing.
But in 1993, didn't know what I was doing, but I launched my first company selling a presentation platform that was very proprietary. It was before, basically I was helping companies move from 35 millimeter slides to digital presentations.
Sure. And back in the early 90s, that must have been huge.
Oh, it was huge.
Yes.
It was huge.
Yes.
And it just started to evolve. One day a company bought these platforms from us and they said, hey, can you do our presentation? So we did video recording, a whole video production, the whole 9 yards, and it just began to grow and grow and grow and grow. And so I started doing the entire events, like everything from staging, lighting, sound, all the technical and creative production.
Right.
And I loved doing the leadership retreats.
Interesting.
Like I wasn't the guy on stage, I was behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And it was probably around 2005, I was doing a big leadership retreat for Deloitte at the Bellagio Hotel. And I was walking around the back of the room. And remember, my team was running everything.
Sure.
And it was all of a sudden like somebody hit me over the head. And it's like, oh, it's time for me to move from the back of the room to the front of the room.
Aha moment right
and that was
there.
it. That was it. And then I took the next steps to move into Black Diamond leadership, and it was a pretty long transition between the two.
Yeah.
And some people always want to know, where does the name come from?
Yeah.
Well, I love skiing,
yeah,
right?
Yep.
And I spent 15 years on a ski patrol and learned a lot about leadership on that ski patrol. And so I thought, Black Diamond, I love that name, Black Diamond. Well, Black Diamond's not available. Black Diamond, this isn't available. Oh, look, blackdiamondleadership.com. And that's how we came up with the name.
Well, Robert, I don't know. When you first said out of school, well, when you were... After you came back, you went into education, teaching type of scenario. And then, watching the leadership and psychology, you see where it set you up for what you're doing.
Absolutely, 100%.
And I bet at the time you weren't even conscious of that was what was happening to you.
No.
I was very similar in that way, is building blocks. And suddenly you go, okay,
not in a million years would I've ever imagined that I would be on stages around the world talking about how to be a highly effective leader or to build highly effective teams.
Wow, that's amazing. I love it when I hear situations like this, because it sneaks up on us. And suddenly we know what we're meant to do.
Absolutely.
Oh, my gosh. Now, you brought it up, and I'm going to talk to me about skiing and ski patrol. How did ski patrol teach you about leadership?
I joined the ski patrol, and immediately I was asked, within a year or two, I was asked to be a hill captain.
Oh.
So just to give a little context, what does that mean? The mountain that I patrolled at, and I did it on the weekends, it was all volunteer,
Sure.
had 3 peaks, and each peak had its own captain, and then the first aid room had a captain, and there was a team leader.
Okay.
And so I was immediately put in charge of being a hill captain.
How old were you?
22.
Wow.
21, 22.
Wow.
And so I had to learn how to lead a team of volunteers.
Oh, boy.
And people who love to ski and want to ski.
Sure.
And yet we had a very important role to play on the mountain. And a couple of years after that, I was asked to be a team leader.
Oh, my.
And that happened about the same time I started developing my content.
Sure.
And the concept of a high-performance leader, which really is about letting your team, empowering your team in a nutshell.
Right.
And I used those tools, and my team became the most successful team. And in fact, people wanted to work on my team because the culture was, I had a culture, and my team had a certain culture.
Yes.
And I remember another team leader asking me, how can you let your hill captains manage all the resources? That should be your job. I said, my job, they're the ones that have to use the resources.
Yes.
They're the ones who know what's leaving and coming back up again.
Right, right.
And they're the ones who know when their people are going to take a lunch break. They need to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be that person. I'm just going to get in the way.
Right, right.
Now I'm always available, and I'm listening to everything on the radios, but I empowered them to do it. And it was just a very successful way of doing it. And then I took the next level of training and development, which is called a senior on our patrol, which is a national certification which develops you to handle mass casualty situations, search and rescue, and other terrible situations. And so that just took me to the next level. But it was really being able to apply what I was learning on ski patrol and also in my production company as well.
Isn't it interesting? You touched on something that I found myself yesterday saying in my head. When you give your team the go-ahead to do their job, and you empower them, and you give them trust, and you know it's a learning experience for them, we're giving them the confidence to move forward and to know that they're growing. I seriously, yesterday I was saying to myself, we got to let this person go with it, and they might fail and they might succeed, but it's going to be a learning experience and it's going to be good for them because it's going to instill confidence as they succeed.
Absolutely. And I think that what leaders don't understand is that if you don't empower your people, now there's a way to do it.
Right.
Right. You don't just give them the keys to the kingdom.
Right.
There's a way to do it.
Right.
But if you don't do that, your job as a leader is going to be 100 times more difficult.
Yes, because then you feel like you got to control
Do
everything.
Yeah.
And that leads to misery.
Yep, absolutely. And exhaustion and burnout and everything else.
Exactly. I'm encountering that at a client right now, and I see where the burnout and the flaws are happening because if somebody doesn't do something right, they say, just give it to me.
Right.
And I think that is the biggest mistake. And full admission, I used to do that a lot.
I did too.
A lot.
It's easy, quote unquote, easier.
Yes.
In the short run.
Yes.
But you failed to develop people.
Exactly.
Like I had a wonderful production manager. And she was very green when she started with me, but I liked who she was and she was smart.
Yeah.
And we were doing a big project in Florida on Amelia Island, the Ritz-Carlton.
Okay.
It was a big, big meeting. And this is just as the internet was starting to come about. And so I said, I want you to go and pull a list of every major AV supply company within 10 miles of where we're going to be, just in case we need some resources,
Okay.
we'll have a list. Well, 2 days later, she came back in and said, well, I'm trying to find the yellow pages, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, did you try the internet? Oh, I didn't think of that. Right? And I said, well, come sit down. Let me show you how you should do this.
Sure.
That was the last time I had to show her.
And she was off to the races.
Right? And now it was just part of our process at that point. And so she would always do that. Now, if I had just taken it back from her, I would have failed as a leader.
Exactly. We're not giving them the chance.
And when I gave her that chance, the pride that she had in herself,
Yes.
she felt more valuable. She felt like a bigger part of the team.
Right.
That she can contribute to our client in ways that she couldn't before.
Right.
Because that just spun to more learning, right?
Exactly. And I think if anybody that I'm working with on my team fails, I never see it as a failure.
Right.
I always say, okay, what can we learn from this? And it's interesting that I just had these thoughts yesterday about this team member, and I thought she's got to fly, and I got to see what she can do, and then I can help her. But in order to empower her and give her confidence, because like your person, she's quite young, quite green. I got to see what she can do and give her that. That's probably one of the best gifts I could give her as a leader.
100%. Yesterday I was coaching a young sales manager. And I was asking them, what is this process when people aren't performing where they need to be? And he said, well, I bring them in and I'll look at their numbers and I'll tell them what they need to do. And I said, that's great.
Right.
However, how about instead of telling them what to do, ask them first, what can you do to improve this? How do you think you can go about this? Right? And he was like, well, oh my God, you mean I can do that? And of course you can.
Wow.
And by doing that, what are you creating?
Right.
And he said, well, I'm teaching them how to think critically.
Yes.
I said, perfect. That's what you want, right? You don't want them running to your office every single time.
Right.
They need help.
Right.
Now, they know you're there for them, right? But, ask those questions. It takes more time at first. I tell people, there's the process, it's like a curve, right? It starts off slow, and then as the momentum builds, you'll find that they're growing faster and faster and faster. And, by the way, you'll more likely than not keep people engaged longer.
Exactly.
And we get the golden thing called discretionary effort.
Yes.
People go beyond and above to their responsibilities.
Exactly. We used to always say, we need somebody who can be a self-starter, that self-starter. And when I hear that, I always think, well, are you teaching people to be self-starters? Are you teaching people the skills? And most of the time they're not. I'm curious what you see in companies, people getting advanced to management positions with zero training. It's only because it's the next step on the pay ladder.
I see it, as you can imagine, all the time.
And then they wonder why upper
failing.
management wonders why they're failing.
Yeah.
or why there's a lawsuit because they weren't trained in proper HR techniques with the people they're managing.
Well, you asked me what my niche is, and I didn't realize that I was kind of focused on this niche, but I actually am, and that is, managers and senior managers. There's a lot of supervisory training for people like that.
Yes.
When you move into executive level, there's the big, we'll send you to Wharton for a 5-day conference, that kind of training.
Yeah.
Not a lot in the middle management space.
No.
And especially when they're moving from, let's say, a senior manager to a director. Senior manager, they're managing others. As a director, you're managing other managers, so other people who lead other people. It's a whole different skill set.
Right.
At that level, and they don't know how to do it. I mean, very talented, smart people.
Yes.
But they don't know how to do it.
Yes.
And that's really the area that I thrive in with my clients.
Right. Who tends to call you in and bring you in? Is it through HR? Is it through ownership, leadership? Is it all of the above?
Surprisingly, it's hardly ever HR.
Really?
Yeah, hardly ever.
Wow.
I'm not sure why yet. I don't really understand. I never figured it out. Any HR people out there, let me know.
Yeah.
Because it made sense to me that HR would be the ones bringing me in.
Sure.
I think that what's happened over the years is that HR has gotten so focused on compliance that they're not really focused on probably why a lot of people went to HR in the first place. That is for the people.
Gotcha.
That might be the reason. I'm not 100% sure.
You may be onto something there because thinking about it, that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's typically a VP. In a larger company, it would be a VP. It could be an executive director who has 4, 5, 6 directors under them. In a hospital, it's usually, because they're smaller hospitals, usually the CEO of the hospital brings me in.
Gotcha. And you travel all over the States, all over the world? Where are you going these days?
I travel a lot in the States.
Okay.
I've done some some projects overseas.
Yes.
A couple of years ago, I was in Poland, Krakow, Poland.
Oh, wow.
And that was fascinating because I was working with Eastern European engineers, teaching them emotional intelligence.
Whoa, how did that go?
It went well.
Yeah, must have been interesting.
It was very interesting because they just saw the world so differently than the way we do. And in fact, the reason why they hired me, because their clients were project managers at large U.S.-based companies. And they didn't understand why the project managers at U.S.-based companies were under so much stress all the time, and they were taking things very personally. Also with the language translation.
Sure.
So once I helped them understand their world, empathy, right? A huge part of EI is empathy.
Okay.
Understand their world. Then we could start working with them and how to manage when their client was upset.
Got it.
And I'll not take it personally and get triggered by it.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating. It was a fascinating project.
I love what you're doing. Seek to understand.
Totally.
The question is, help me understand why this is happening. And sort of being a little bit of a detective. And your background in psychology has got to be huge in helping you with that.
It does help. We've developed a model that I use. And then if we have time, I can just share the highlights of this model because it's very powerful.
Yeah.
So we look at when something happens, we call it a key moment, a triggering event, something that causes our emotions to get triggered. And when that happens, we look at we experience it through, or we make sense of it by our paradigms, by how we see the world, right? So, I was told I was found in the trash can growing up.
Right.
So I had a paradigm that nobody wanted me, right? And the way that would manifest, I started noticing this, is if I called you 3 times, Jerry, and you didn't return my phone call, Jerry doesn't want me. Right. And then when you did call me, I'd be kind of standoffish.
Sure.
Right. So, but I didn't realize I was doing that. So that's the paradigm, how we see the world, we experience it. And then we try to give it meaning. We try to make sense of it, have thoughts about it. And oftentimes our thoughts are not necessarily accurate or logical, and they're usually negative.
Old messaging.
And then our thoughts inform our feelings, both internal and in our minds. And then our feelings really cause our behavior, how we respond or what we do. And depending on that, we either go down what I call the pathway of survival, which is we're disowning responsibility, we're blaming other people, basically we're victims.
Right.
Or up the pathway of self-mastery when we seek to learn about our experiences by our key moments.
Interesting.
And then we teach other aspects of it. So one aspect is called the distortions in our reasoning, right? So And it's when one of the distortions is mind reading, for example, or catastrophizing what's going on. So I was hired by a very successful woman who felt that she was being overlooked for a promotion. And we started working on her and teaching her emotional intelligence. And I said, okay, so who do you need to talk to? And so I need to talk to this person. I said, okay, so by when are you going to reach out to that person? Oh, I'm not going to do that.
I can't do that.
Why not? Well, he's an SVP, senior vice president.
So?
I said, okay, well, why not? Well, he doesn't want to talk to me. I said, oh, really?
Interesting.
So which distortion are you using right now? I said, oh, man, I'm mind reading. So exactly. How do you know? What's the worst thing that could happen, right? Worst, best, common, right? He says no.
Yeah.
What's the best thing? I get my promotion. Okay, so are you willing to make that reach out? And said, absolutely. 3 months later, she got her promotion.
Nice.
And she smiled at me because she said I was totally caught up in my head. And that's a component of emotional intelligence. You can see how this would manifest into a leader working with a team or team members, in a conflict. You asked me if I did conflict resolution.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It all plays into the whole shebang. I mean,
It's been a journey for me. I mean, it's been a huge journey.
Has it?
For me. And there are times when I recognize a quick experience. I was doing a keynote on psychological safety.
Yes.
And I was on stage, and I could only see the first couple of rows, right? It's all blacked out back there.
Sure.
And I look down, and I see a woman on her cell phone. And it's hard to articulate the experience, but I looked at it, and I kept on going. And afterwards, I was thinking about what was important to me about that. I said, gosh, in the past, I would have seen somebody on their phone and I would have made up a whole story about how boring I am.
Yes.
This, that, blah, 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 blah. And so I would be knocked off my A game.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
For a period of time.
Yes.
And that's another way we promote this work is we say, we get knocked off our A game all the time. The game is how quickly can we get back on our A game again and be effective.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew that I have fully embraced what I teach.
Yeah, your journey has moved you personally. That's fantastic. Robert, thank you so much for sitting with me today.
Oh, this is wonderful.
Has been such a great conversation. I love learning more about you. And even though we've known each other for many years, we continue to learn, and I just want to thank you for being here today.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to participate.
Oh,
thank you.
You got it. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Presented by Echelon Business Development. More than just networking. Way more.